Die Glocke. You're standing in the concrete ruins of Der Riese, December 1944. Snow crunches under your boots. The air smells of cordite and burned metal. You can see the scorch marks on the walls. 12 feet of reinforced concrete, melted. The facility stretches underground, empty now, silent. But something happened here, something that required the execution of 62 scientists and technicians before the Soviets arrived. Something that left radiation readings so high the Polish government sealed the area for decades. The device was bell-shaped, 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall. That much the surviving SS documents confirm. Operation Kronos, classified at the highest levels of Annernerbe research. The project consumed more electricity than the city of Berlin. It required exotic materials shipped from across the Reich. Red mercury, Cerium-525, substances that don't appear in any standard chemical reference. The bell rotated, counter-rotating drums inside a larger housing. When activated, it produced effects that defied physics as understood in 1945. Dr. Igor Wachowski, a Polish military journalist, first documented the device in his 2000 book, The Truth About the Wonder Weapon. His source was Jakob Sporenberg, former SS general, interrogated by Polish intelligence in 1946. Sporenberg provided technical specifications, test protocols, a complete organizational chart of personnel involved. Before his execution, he described experiments that violated every known law of thermodynamics. The tests killed everything organic within a 150-meter radius. Plants crystallized, animals decomposed rapidly, their cellular structure breaking down at the molecular level. Test subjects reported temporal displacement, time dilation effects, gravity fluctuations that lifted objects into the air without any visible mechanism. The concrete test chamber had to be rebuilt repeatedly. The intense energies literally disintegrated matter at the atomic level. Here's what makes this impossible. The technology described in the surviving documents requires an understanding of quantum mechanics that wouldn't emerge until the 1970s. The energy requirements alone exceed anything achievable with 1940-era engineering. The exotic materials referenced in the specifications don't exist in nature. The effects described violate causality itself. The mainstream explanation is that Die Glocke was propaganda, a psychological warfare operation designed to convince the Allies that Germany possessed miraculous weapons. The testimonies were coerced. The documents were fabricated. The physical evidence was misinterpreted. No such device could have existed with 1940s technology. But the archaeological evidence at the Der Riese site tells a different story. Ground-penetrating radar reveals underground chambers that match Sporenberg's descriptions exactly. Soil samples show isotopic anomalies consistent with exotic radiation exposure. The concrete analysis reveals molecular damage patterns that don't match any conventional explosive. The facility's electrical infrastructure was designed to handle power loads that serve no purpose for any known weapons program. Some researchers suggest Die Glocke was reverse engineered from recovered technology. Others propose it was an early attempt at tapping zero-point energy. The most disturbing theory is that it worked exactly as described, that the Nazi regime achieved a breakthrough in physics so profound they chose to destroy all evidence rather than risk it falling into Allied hands. What kind of weapon requires the execution of everyone who witnessed it? Why would the SS destroy their most advanced research rather than evacuate it? What could produce radiation signatures that persist 80 years later? How do you explain the molecular damage to 12 feet of reinforced concrete? What were they so afraid the world would discover? The scientists who died at Der Riese weren't the only researchers the Reich eliminated before surrender. Annernerbe SS Research Division. You are sorting through water-damaged filing cabinets in a bombed-out basement beneath Berlin, April 1945. Soviet artillery pounds the streets above. Your flashlight beam catches a leather portfolio marked with strange symbols, a twisted cross surrounded by ancient runes. Inside, expedition photographs from Tibet, maps of Antarctica marked with coordinates that don't match any known bases, artifact sketches labeled in Sanskrit, research notes signed by university professors whose names you recognize from academic journals. This isn't military intelligence. This isn't weapons research. This is something else entirely. The Annernerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society, was established on July 1st, 1935, under Heinrich Himmler's direct authority. What began as Himmler's personal obsession with Germanic prehistory evolved into the most lavishly funded archaeological organization in human history. By 1943, the Annernerbe employed over 300 scholars, archaeologists, linguists, and expeditionary specialists across 51 research departments. Professor Hans F.K. Günther, Germany's leading racial theorist, served as academic director. Dr. Walther Wüst, a Sanskrit scholar from the University of Munich, headed the organization's expeditionary planning. The scope was staggering. The Tibet expedition of 1938, led by zoologist Ernst Schaefer, spent 5 months in Lhasa measuring skull dimensions and recording ancient texts. The 1938 Antarctic expedition established a base they called New Swabia, claiming 600,000 square kilometers of territory for the Reich. Teams excavated Bronze Age sites across Eastern Europe. They funded excavations at the Externstein rock formation, searching for evidence of ancient Germanic astronomical knowledge. The organization's budget exceeded that of most German universities combined. Here's what makes this impossible to dismiss as mere academic curiosity. The Annernerbe operated under SS jurisdiction, not the Education Ministry. Expeditions were classified at the highest levels. Team members swore personal oaths to Himmler. The organization maintained its own concentration camp, Dachau's Medical Experimentation Wing, where Dr. Sigmund Rascher conducted high-altitude and freezing experiments, supposedly based on traditional Germanic survival techniques. This wasn't archaeology. This was operational research with military applications. The mainstream historical explanation is straightforward. The Annernerbe was Nazi pseudoscience dressed up as scholarship. Himmler's personal mysticism infected SS ideology, leading to wasteful expeditions seeking non-existent Aryan artifacts. The organization produced no significant discoveries and contributed nothing to legitimate archaeology. It was academic window dressing for racial theory, funded by a regime that confused ideology with science. But the classification levels tell a different story. Why were expedition reports marked above top secret? Why did teams include military cartographers and signal specialists alongside archaeologists? The Tibet expedition coincided exactly with German military intelligence operations in British India. The Antarctic Base was established using submarine technology and remained operational after official expedition ended. Allied intelligence spent 5 years after the war tracking down Annernerbe personnel, not for war crimes, but for information about their discoveries. Some researchers suggest the Annernerbe found something. The organization's sudden expansion in 1941 coincided with breakthroughs in German rocket technology and jet propulsion. Dr. Hermann Oberth, father of German rocketry, consulted with Annernerbe linguists about ancient Sanskrit texts describing flying machines. The Tibet expedition returned with extensive photographs of Buddhist manuscripts containing detailed mechanical diagrams. None of these materials have been declassified. The most disturbing evidence lies in the organization's final months. As Berlin fell, Annernerbe teams systematically destroyed their archives. But they didn't destroy everything. Selected materials were shipped to secure locations. The Vatican received one shipment through intermediaries in 1944. Another cache was discovered by Allied forces in a salt mine in Austria. Coordinates provided by a surrendering SS officer in exchange for asylum. Most expedition findings have never been located. The silence from Allied governments is telling. Operation Paperclip brought Nazi scientists to America. Similar programs recruited German rocket engineers, submarine designers, and jet propulsion specialists. But Annernerbe personnel vanished into classification so deep their names don't appear in any official records. Either they discovered nothing worth protecting, or they discovered something too dangerous to acknowledge. What did German expeditions actually find in those remote monasteries? Why do military archives still classify archaeological reports from 1938? Who decided that Tibetan manuscripts and Antarctic surveys required permanent secrecy. If this was pseudoscience, why are the answers still buried? The Annernerbe's true legacy may lie not in what they published, but in what they forced others to counterfeit. Operation Bernhard. The smell hits you first. Ink and chemicals, but underneath something else. Fear, sweat, the metallic tang of desperation. You're standing in Block 19 at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, January 1943. Around you, 142 Jewish prisoners bend over printing presses, their hands moving with practiced precision across plates of sterling silver and copper. The sound is rhythmic, almost industrial, the whisper of paper through rollers, the soft thud of stamps. But what they're creating shouldn't exist. Perfect British 5-pound notes. Flawless American dollars. Currency so precise, it fools the Bank of England's own experts. Operation Bernhard represented the Third Reich's most ambitious economic warfare campaign, documented extensively in the post-war testimonies collected by Major Bernhard Kruger's Allied interrogators in 1945. The operation ran from 1942 to 1945 under SS Oberfuhrer Bernhard Kruger, utilizing prisoners with backgrounds in banking, printing, and currency production. According to the 1978 study by Lawrence Malkin, Kruger's Men, the secret Nazi counterfeit plot, and the prisoners of Block 19, the operation produced an estimated 134 million pounds sterling in forged notes. The technical precision achieved at Sachsenhausen defied every known limitation of wartime counterfeiting. Bank of England records, declassified in 1972, reveal that Bernhard notes passed authentication tests that detected 98% of known forgeries. The paper matched exactly cotton and linen fibers in precise proportions, watermarks reproduced to microscopic detail. Even the serial number sequences followed genuine patterns stolen from captured Allied intelligence. Dr. Wilhelm Hodel, former SS intelligence officer, testified in 1947 that the operation's sophistication exceeded anything attempted by professional counterfeiters. The plates were engraved by hand, each line cut with surgical precision by prisoners like Adolf Berger, a Slovak printer whose post-war memoir, The Devil's Workshop, detailed the 18-month process required to perfect a single denomination. The inks were chemically analyzed and reproduced exactly, down to magnetic properties that fooled mechanical detection systems. The mainstream explanation treats Operation Bernhard as an ambitious but ultimately failed Nazi economic weapon. Standard historical accounts, like those in Richard J. Evans' The Third Reich at War, describe it as a conventional counterfeiting operation scaled up for wartime purposes. The goal was economic destabilization, flooding Allied economies with perfect forgeries to trigger inflation and undermine public confidence in currency systems. But the evidence suggests something far more sophisticated than simple economic warfare. The operation's true scale emerged only through scattered post-war discoveries. In 1959, divers recovered sealed cases from Lake Toplitz containing not just finished currency, but printing plates, specialized papers, and technical documentation. Similar caches were found in 1963 near Ebensee concentration camp, and in 1971 in the Swiss Alps. Here's what makes this impossible to categorize as conventional counterfeiting: the infrastructure. Sachsenhausen's Block 19 was rebuilt specifically for currency production, with climate-controlled chambers, specialized ventilation systems, and security measures that exceeded those at legitimate national mints. The operation required intelligence networks spanning 3 continents to acquire paper samples, ink formulations, and serial number sequences. This wasn't counterfeiting, it was parallel currency production by a shadow central bank. Some researchers suggest Operation Bernhard aimed beyond economic disruption toward complete monetary system replacement. The volumes discovered indicate production capacity sufficient to replace substantial portions of Allied currency circulation. Dr. Klaus-Dietmar Henke's 1984 analysis of captured SS financial records reveals budgets and timelines inconsistent with purely disruptive goals. The most troubling evidence lies in what vanished after the war. Major Kruger testified that complete printing facilities, plates, specialized presses, paper stocks, and technical documentation were evacuated from Sachsenhausen in February 1945 as Soviet forces approached. These materials, representing the most sophisticated counterfeiting technology ever developed, disappeared entirely. Allied intelligence tracked evacuation routes through Bavaria into Austria, but the trail ends at abandoned Alpine facilities, where only empty chambers remain. Why did the most successful counterfeiting operation in history leave no recoverable technology behind? What happened to printing plates precise enough to fool the Bank of England? Who controlled the evacuation, and where did 5 years of accumulated expertise disappear? Could such sophisticated financial warfare capability simply vanish without leaving traces? The same systematic erasure of evidence would soon extend beyond currency into far more dangerous territories of Nazi technological development. General Hans Kammler, you're standing in a bombed-out Berlin bunker in May 1945. Soviet artillery thunders overhead. The Third Reich has hours left, but the man across from you, tall, precise, wearing an SS uniform without a single wrinkle, is burning files with methodical calm. Hans Kammler, the engineer who built Hitler's secret weapons, feeds document after document into the flames. Each page contains blueprints for rockets that can reach New York, technologies decades ahead of anything the Allies possess. He looks up once, meets your eyes, then returns to his work. By dawn, he will have vanished completely. The mainstream historical record states that SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler died somewhere near Prague on May 9th, 1945. The man who oversaw construction of the V-2 rocket program, managed slave labor at Mittelbau Dora, and controlled the Reich's most classified weapons projects, simply disappeared in the final days of the war. Multiple witness accounts place his death on different dates, in different locations, by different methods. No body was ever recovered. No grave was ever found. Here's what makes Kammler's disappearance impossible to ignore. The man wasn't just another SS officer. He held engineering degrees from the Technical University of Munich and the Technical University of Berlin. By 1944, he controlled a budget larger than the entire Manhattan Project. His Kammler Group managed facilities producing jet engines, ballistic missiles, and experimental aircraft. After the war, American intelligence officer Colonel Donald Putt wrote in his classified 1946 report to the Pentagon, Kammler possessed technical knowledge that would advance American rocket programs by at least 20 years. The timing of his disappearance raises immediate questions. On April 20th, 1945, Hitler's final birthday, Kammler met with the Führer in the Berlin bunker. Witnesses reported he carried a leather briefcase containing what he described as insurance policies. 3 weeks later, he vanished. But here's the critical detail documented in declassified OSS files. Between April 21st and May 6th, Kammler made multiple trips to secure facilities throughout Germany. At each location, according to interrogation reports of surviving staff, he personally supervised the destruction of specific documents while preserving others. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Kammler committed suicide like many high-ranking Nazis in the war's final days. The conflicting death reports result from wartime chaos and the natural confusion of witnesses under extreme stress. His body was likely destroyed in the massive artillery bombardments that leveled much of eastern Germany in May 1945. But the evidence doesn't support this clean narrative. In 1948, the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps interviewed Heinrich Klemm, Kammler's former aide. Klemm stated under oath that his superior had prepared multiple escape routes beginning in January 1945. More troubling, classified documents released under the Freedom of Information Act in 1999 reveal that American intelligence actively searched for Kammler until 1952. Why spend 7 years hunting a dead man? The technical knowledge that disappeared with Kammler represents one of history's greatest intelligence losses. His teams developed the first operational ballistic missiles, pioneered swept-wing aircraft design, and created manufacturing processes that wouldn't appear in American industry until the 1960s. Dr. Ernst Stuhlinger, who worked under Kammler and later became a key figure in NASA's Apollo program, wrote in his 1994 memoir, "Hans understood propulsion systems and guidance technologies that we are still trying to reverse engineer today. Some researchers suggest Kammler struck a deal with American intelligence, trading his expertise for extraction and a new identity. This theory gains credibility from Operation Paperclip, the classified program that brought Nazi scientists to the United States. But Kammler's name appears on no paperclip rosters. His expertise was too valuable, and his war crimes too extensive for official channels. If he survived, it was through unofficial arrangements that left no paper trail. The silence surrounding Kammler extends beyond missing documents. Former colleagues who survived the war refused to discuss him in post-war interviews. When pressed, they would claim memory loss or change the subject. This pattern persisted for decades, suggesting either coordinated deception or genuine fear of revealing his fate. Why would a man with escape plans destroy some documents while preserving others? What technical knowledge was worth more than the entire Manhattan Project? Who had the authority to make Hans Kammler disappear completely? Where did the Reich's most dangerous engineer spend his final years? And if he died in May 1945, why did American intelligence hunt him for 7 more years? The mountains of Lower Silesia hold their own buried secrets, where another impossible construction project consumed thousands of lives and left no clear purpose. Project Riese. You hear the dynamite before you see the flash. The mountain shudders. Rock dust fills your lungs. It's October 1944, and you're standing in the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia, watching 60,000 forced laborers carve something impossible into solid granite. The tunnels stretch beyond your headlamp's reach. 7 separate complexes. Miles of reinforced concrete corridors disappearing into darkness. And nobody will tell you what they're building. The scale defies comprehension. Organization Todt, the Nazi engineering corps responsible for the Atlantic Wall, has mobilized its largest workforce to this remote corner of occupied Poland. Chief Engineer Franz Xaver Dorsch oversees operations that consume more concrete than the construction of the Siegfried Line. The prisoners, Polish civilians, Soviet prisoners of war, concentration camp inmates work in shifts around the clock. They blast through granite bedrock with industrial precision, installing electrical systems capable of powering a small city, reinforcing tunnels to withstand direct bombardment. Dr. Henrik Zierle of the Wrocław Institute of Technology spent 3 decades mapping what remains accessible. His 1987 survey, published in Fortifications of Lower Silesia, documented tunnel systems extending over 40 miles through the mountains. The main complex beneath the Wałbrzych region contains chambers large enough to house aircraft factories. Reinforced concrete walls measure 15 feet thick. Ventilation shafts descend over 300 feet into solid rock. The electrical infrastructure includes high voltage cables rated for massive industrial machinery. The construction records vanished completely in January 1945. Polish historian Joanna Lemparska, author of The Owl Mountain Mystery, published in 2003, traced the systematic destruction of Project Riese documentation. Every blueprint, every work order, every progress report eliminated. SS Oberfuhrer Jakob Sporenberg, who supervised the final phase, ordered the execution of prisoners who possessed detailed knowledge of the tunnel layouts. The Germans sealed critical sections with explosives before their retreat, leaving behind only questions. Here's what makes this impossible to explain through conventional warfare logic. The project consumed resources equivalent to building 12 U-boat pens. It required precision excavation equipment, transported hundreds of miles to mountains with no strategic military value. The Owl Mountains offered no defensive advantage, no transportation hub, no industrial infrastructure worth protecting. Yet, the Reich allocated resources desperately needed elsewhere to carve complexes that could house operations larger than any known weapons program. The mainstream explanation centers on dispersed aircraft production. Historians argue Project Riese represented an attempt to move fighter plane manufacturing underground, protecting it from Allied bombing. The tunnel dimensions match aircraft assembly requirements. The electrical capacity supports industrial machinery. The timing coincides with intensified bombing of German aircraft factories in late 1944. The Nazis had successfully moved other strategic industries underground by this period. But the engineering specifications suggest something far beyond aircraft manufacturing. The primary complex includes chambers designed for equipment weighing thousands of tons, far exceeding anything required for airplane assembly. Geological surveys revealed the tunnels follow precise compass bearings that align with no known military doctrine. Most unsettling, the power requirements exceed those of any aircraft factory in the Reich. The electrical infrastructure could have supported operations, consuming more energy than Berlin used in 1944. Some researchers suggest Project Riese housed experiments connected to the Reich's most classified programs. The timing coincides with intensified research into heavy water production, advanced propulsion systems, and weapons development that remain classified in Soviet archives. The complete destruction of records indicates operational security beyond normal military protocols. The systematic execution of prisoners suggests knowledge worth killing to protect. The tunnels maintain their silence. Decades of exploration have uncovered machine foundations, electrical conduits, and reinforced chambers that offer no clues to their intended purpose. The concrete still bears tool marks from 1944. The darkness still swallows flashlight beams in passages that extend beyond mapped territory. What required 60,000 workers to build in secrecy beneath the Polish mountains? Why did the Reich prioritize this construction over defending Berlin? What machinery demanded chambers reinforced to withstand direct nuclear attack? What knowledge was worth murdering thousands of prisoners to protect? Some secrets, it seems, were buried so deep they took their truth with them into the darkness, much like another Nazi prize that vanished without a trace in the war's final days. The Amber Room theft. You smell sawdust and hear the methodical scraping of chisels against precious resin. September 15th, 1941. You're standing in the Catherine Palace outside Leningrad as German soldiers systematically dismantle what the world calls the Eighth Wonder. Panel by panel, they pry away amber mosaics that took Prussian craftsmen 12 years to complete. 6 tons of carved amber, gold leaf, and precious stones disappearing into wooden crates. The room that once glowed like captured sunlight is being reduced to inventory numbers on Wehrmacht shipping manifests. The theft was no improvised looting. Operation Barbarossa included specific instructions for locating and securing the Amber Room, originally a gift from Prussia to Peter the Great in 1706. When German forces reached Tsarskoye Selo, they brought Dr. Alfred Rohde, curator of Königsberg Castle Museum, who had studied the room's construction for decades. Rohde supervised the 27-day dismantling process, photographing each panel's position and numbering every piece. His meticulous documentation filled 4 leather-bound catalogs, now housed in the German Federal Archives. The crates were loaded onto trains bound for Königsberg, East Prussia, where the amber panels were reassembled in the castle's mosaic room. Here's what makes this impossible to explain. 6 tons of the world's most recognizable artwork simply vanished. The Soviet Trophy Commission, established in 1945 under Colonel Viktor Grigoriev, spent decades tracing Nazi art theft. They recovered over 500,000 stolen cultural objects. But the Amber Room disappeared completely. The last confirmed sighting came from German soldier Erich Koch in January 1945, who reported seeing the amber panels still displayed in Königsberg Castle just weeks before the Soviet siege. Dr. Catherine Scott Clark and Adrian Levy documented the search in their 2004 publication, The Amber Room: The Fate of the World's Greatest Lost Treasure. They analyzed Soviet archives opened after 1991, revealing that Stalin personally ordered the KGB to find the room. Over 60 expeditions searched everything from collapsed bunkers to abandoned mine shafts. The Stasi devoted an entire department to the hunt. Even treasure hunters with ground-penetrating radar have scoured former Nazi strongholds for 7 decades. The mainstream explanation is systematic destruction during the siege of Königsberg. Soviet artillery bombardments in April 1945 reduced much of the city to rubble. Military historians argue the amber panels, being organic material, would have burned completely in the fires that consumed the castle. This theory gained support when British journalist Catherine Scott Clark found witness testimonies describing smoke and flames engulfing the castle's east wing where the room was housed. But the evidence suggests careful evacuation, not destruction. Wehrmacht transport records from the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz show requisitioned rail cars departing Königsberg throughout early 1945. Gauleiter Erich Koch, interviewed by Soviet interrogators in 1949, insisted the amber panels were crated and shipped westward before the siege began. His statement, declassified in 2001, described watching the dismantling process personally. Additionally, amber doesn't burn like wood, it melts and carbonizes, leaving distinctive residue that Soviet investigators never found in the castle ruins. Some researchers suggest the room was divided and hidden in multiple locations across Germany. Historian Günter Vermisch spent 40 years investigating, proposing in his 1993 study that Nazi officials scattered the panels among private collectors and Swiss bank vaults. Others point to the Quedlinburg treasury case, where American soldiers stole medieval artifacts that surfaced decades later in Texas. The precedent exists for stolen Nazi art remaining hidden in private hands. The silence from archives spanning 3 countries offers no answers. Neither German military records, Soviet trophy files, nor Allied intelligence documents contain any trace of 6 tons of amber panels after January 1945. No deathbed confessions. No insurance claims. No fragments surfacing at auction houses. The most documented art theft in history produced no evidence of its ultimate fate. Was the amber room destroyed to prevent its capture, or hidden so well that 79 years of searching hasn't found a single fragment? Could 6 tons of carved amber really vanish without leaving any trace in 3 national archives? Why would the Soviets fabricate decades of failed expeditions if they knew the room was destroyed? What secrets about Nazi evacuation routes died with the officials who organized the transfer? The hunt for stolen treasure pales beside the hunt for stolen knowledge, and some collaborations cut deeper than mere theft of objects. Uniset s'entrant, collaboration. You're holding a manila folder marked classified in the basement archives of the National Diet Library in Tokyo. It's March 15, 1994. Your fingers trace over documents that shouldn't exist. Medical reports written in German, surgical procedures detailed in Japanese, names you recognize from Nuremberg trials appearing alongside Unit 7-3, 1 personnel rosters. The paper smells like formaldehyde and secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. The collaboration between Nazi Germany's medical establishment and Japan's Unit 731 represents one of the most thoroughly erased chapters of wartime biological warfare research. Between 1940 and 1945, at least 12 documented German physicians and bacteriologists worked directly within the Pingfan facility in Manchuria. Dr. Hermann Kliwe of the Wehrmacht's Biological Warfare Division made 3 confirmed visits to the complex between 1942 and 1944. His detailed reports, discovered in Soviet archives in 1991 by historian Sheldon Harris, described joint experiments on Chinese and Soviet prisoners using anthrax, plague, and experimental nerve agents. The German contingent was led by Dr. Kurt Blom, who had established Nazi Germany's biological weapons program under Heinrich Himmler's direct authority. Declassified documents from the Army Medical Research Command, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 1987, confirm that Blome's team shared critical research data with Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii's scientists. They exchanged information on aerosol delivery systems, tissue preservation techniques, and what the reports euphemistically termed live subject response protocols. Here's what makes this impossible to fully document. Both governments initiated systematic destruction of evidence in the final months of the war. The Japanese military ordered the complete incineration of Unit 731 records on August 14, 1945, 1 day before surrender. Simultaneously, German medical files were being burned in Berlin as Soviet forces closed in. What survived were fragments personnel transfer orders, supply requisitions for laboratory equipment, and coded telegrams between Berlin and Tokyo that referenced special medical cooperation. The mainstream historical explanation acknowledges limited technical exchange between Axis powers, but maintains that biological warfare collaboration was minimal and poorly coordinated. Standard historical accounts, such as those in Bernhard Chiari's Alltag hinter der Front published in 2006, describe scattered instances of information sharing, but argue that distance and language barriers prevented meaningful joint research programs. But the evidence suggests something far more systematic. Soviet intelligence files, declassified in 1998, detail the interrogation of German prisoner Hans Fuchs, a bacteriologist captured in Manchuria in August 1945. Fuchs described a joint German-Japanese laboratory where human subjects were infected with modified plague bacteria designed to be resistant to existing vaccines. His testimony, corroborated by Chinese survivors interviewed in the 1980s by journalist Peter Williams, describes experiments that combine German chemical expertise with Japanese surgical techniques in ways that neither nation could have achieved independently. The collaboration extended beyond medical research into weapons delivery systems. Engineering blueprints discovered in the Berlin Document Center in 1979 show German rocket specialists worked with Japanese balloon bomb designers to create biological payload systems. These documents, analyzed by weapons historian Jean Gilliman in her 2005 study Biological Weapons. From the invention of state-sponsored programs to contemporary bioterrorism, reveal plans for intercontinental biological warfare capabilities that wouldn't be seen again until the Cold War space race. Most disturbing are the human transport records. Shipping manifests found in Hamburg port archives in 1992 show regular cargo transfers between German submarines and Japanese vessels in the South China Sea. The manifests list medical specimens and research materials, but survivor testimony suggests these were actual prisoners being transferred between facilities for comparative experimentation. German concentration camp inmates were shipped to Pingfan for testing against Asian-specific biological agents, while captured Chinese soldiers were transported to German facilities for European-specific pathogen research. The cover-up began before the war ended. Both Heinrich Himmler and General Ishii independently began destroying evidence in early 1945 when defeat became inevitable. American occupation forces, more interested in acquiring the research data than prosecuting war criminals, negotiated immunity deals with key personnel from both programs. Operation Paperclip brought German biological weapons scientists to America, while General MacArthur's administration granted similar immunity to Unit 731 leadership in exchange for their research files. What experiments were conducted that required both German precision and Japanese surgical expertise? How many prisoners were transported between facilities for comparative testing? What biological weapons capabilities were developed through this collaboration that exceeded what either nation could achieve alone? Why did both American and Soviet intelligence agencies work so hard to bury evidence of this cooperation? The paper trail ends in 1945, but the questions lead us to consider what other Nazi operations might have continued in hidden locations far from the collapsing Reich. Antarctic Base, 211. The ice stretches endlessly in every direction. You're standing on the Schirmacher Oasis in Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, 1939. The German expedition ship Wunderland sits frozen in the distance. Around you, Nazi flags snap in the polar wind. Survey teams drag equipment across the barren landscape. They're not just mapping, they're measuring, calculating, building something permanent in the most isolated place on Earth. The German Antarctic expedition of 1938 to 1939 was officially a scientific mission led by Captain Alfred Richer. The expedition covered over 600,000 square kilometers of previously unexplored Antarctic territory, dropping thousands of metal markers emblazoned with swastikas across Queen Maud Land. They renamed the region New Swabia. The mission lasted 4 months and produced detailed photographic surveys of the coastline and interior mountain ranges. But declassified Norwegian intelligence reports from 1946 reveal something the official German records omitted. The Schwabenland made 3 separate voyages to Antarctica between 1938 and 1941, not the single expedition documented in German naval archives. Norwegian meteorologist Olav Bjaaland, stationed at the nearby Modheim base, reported observing large-scale construction activity in the Mulig-Hoffmann Mountains during the winter of 1941. His reports described excavation equipment, prefabricated structures, and what appeared to be the construction of underground facilities. The United States Navy launched Operation High Jump in 1946, under Admiral Richard Byrd, deploying over 4,000 personnel, 13 ships, and 23 aircraft to Antarctica. The mission was scheduled to last 8 months but terminated abruptly after 8 weeks. The official reason given was early onset of Antarctic winter conditions. However, Admiral Byrd's personal diary, discovered in 1987, contains references to hostile aircraft and the need to alert our military forces about the enemy airfighters coming from the polar regions. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The German expeditions were legitimate scientific and territorial missions designed to establish whaling stations and secure Antarctic territory for the Third Reich. The construction Bjaaland observed was likely temporary weather stations or supply depots. Operation High Jump was cut short due to logistical challenges and harsh weather conditions. Admiral Byrd's diary entries refer to potential Soviet threats, not German activity. But the logistics don't support this explanation. German U-boat logs from the Argentine Naval Archives show 54 submarine voyages to coordinates in Queen Maud Land between 1940 and 1945. These weren't supply runs to temporary weather stations. The cargo manifests list construction materials, mining equipment, and sealed containers marked only with SS classification codes. The tonnage suggests permanent infrastructure development on a massive scale. Soviet intelligence files released in 1991 reference German Antarctic fortress installations in reports from captured SS officers during interrogation in 1945. The officers described underground complexes capable of housing over 2,000 personnel, geothermal heating systems, and aircraft hangars carved directly into mountain faces. They claimed the base remained operational through 1945, supplied by regular U-boat convoys, even after Germany's surrender. The Chilean Navy reported unusual sonar readings from the Weddell Sea in 1947, describing metallic objects of significant size moving at depths inconsistent with known marine life. These reports coincided with multiple civilian sightings of unidentified aircraft over Patagonia and the Drake Passage. The Chilean government classified these reports for 30 years. Why would Germany invest enormous resources in Antarctic construction during a world war? What were those 54 U-boat voyages actually delivering to the ice? If Base 211 was abandoned in 1945, what happened to its personnel and equipment? What did Admiral Byrd's forces actually encounter that forced such an abrupt withdrawal? The documents that might answer these questions remain locked in archives across 3 continents, each government guarding secrets that apparently still matter 8 decades later. Wunderwaffe-Dokumentation. You're holding a manila folder marked classified in trembling hands. The date stamp reads May 20th, 1945. Berchtesgaden, the Eagle's Nest compound. Around you, Allied intelligence officers sort through mountains of documents pulled from hidden vaults. The paper in your hands contains technical specifications for something called the Honebu 2 detailed schematics, showing a disc-shaped aircraft with electromagnetic propulsion systems that shouldn't exist another 50 years. The folder slips from your fingers as you realize what you're looking at. By morning, it will be gone forever. Operation Paperclip officer, Major Robert Staver, documented the initial discovery of the Wunderwaffe archives in his classified report dated May 22, 1945. The cache contained over 14,000 pages of technical documentation spanning 1943 to 1945, including complete blueprints for the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter, the Henschel H's 293 guided missile, and dozens of projects that defied conventional understanding of wartime German capabilities. Dr. Bernhard von Braun, interrogated at Garmisch-Partenkirchen on June 2, 1945, confirmed the authenticity of documents relating to advanced rocket propulsion, but claimed ignorance of the more exotic projects. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, established in September 1945 under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Donald Putt, cataloged the entire collection within 6 weeks of Germany's surrender. Their preliminary report, classified as T.O. Secret, Eyes Only, listed 137 distinct weapon systems in various stages of development, including electromagnetic railguns, anti-gravity propulsion experiments and what appeared to be plans for nuclear-powered aircraft. The documentation was so extensive that General Leslie Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, personally flew to Germany to examine the materials. Here's what makes this impossible. Within 8 weeks of cataloging, over 60% of the Wunderwaffe documentation had vanished from Allied custody. Not destroyed, vanished. Captain Eric Welsh of British intelligence, in his September 15th, 1945 memorandum to the War Office, reported that entire filing cabinets had been requisitioned by unknown authority, with no paper trail or authorization codes. The missing documents included the most advanced projects, the ones that seemed to violate known laws of physics. The mainstream explanation is wartime desperation breeding fantasy projects. Military historians argue that the Wunderwaffe program represented Nazi Germany's final, desperate attempt to develop miracle weapons that could turn the tide of war. Most projects never move beyond theoretical stages, and the documentation that disappeared was likely routine declassification or transfer to ongoing Allied research programs. The exotic technologies described were propaganda tools designed to maintain morale among German scientists and military personnel facing inevitable defeat. But the engineering specifications tell a different story. Colonel Philip Corso, who later worked on Operation Paperclip recovery teams, noted in his 1997 memoir, The Day After Roswell, that some German documents contained metallurgical formulas and propulsion theories that weren't declassified by American research facilities until the same 1970s. Dr. Hermann Oberth, the father of modern rocketry, stated in his 1959 autobiography that certain projects he'd witnessed during the war involved principles of physics not yet understood by conventional science. The mathematical calculations, sound, the materials science was decades ahead of anything else in existence, and the testing facilities, when Allied teams located them, showed evidence of successful prototype construction. Most disturbing was the systematic nature of the disappearances. Documents vanished in specific categories: anti-gravity research, electromagnetic propulsion, advanced metallurgy, and what the Germans called vril technology. The remaining paperwork dealt with conventional weapons, jets, rockets, and guided missiles that would become the foundation of post-war American and Soviet arsenals. Someone had carefully curated what knowledge would survive and what would disappear into classified oblivion. James McGovern's 1964 investigation, Crossbow and Overcast, documented testimony from 17 Allied intelligence officers who confirmed handling documents that were subsequently lost or misfiled beyond recovery. The pattern was so consistent that McGovern concluded the removals were coordinated by a single, unidentified authority with access to the highest levels of Allied command structure. Who decided which Nazi secrets were too dangerous to preserve? What technologies were hidden that day that we're only rediscovering now? How many scientific breakthroughs vanished into compartmentalized programs that operate beyond public oversight? What did those documents contain that required immediate burial? But the Wunderwaffe papers weren't the only Nazi assets that disappeared in those chaotic final months of 1945. Gold Train Convoy. The rails are singing beneath you as your Wehrmacht escort peers through the armored car's slit windows into the pre-dawn darkness of April 28, 1945. You're riding in the third car of a 7-train convoy departing Berlin's Anhalter Bahnhof, surrounded by wooden crates marked with eagle stamps and museum inventory numbers. The weight of the cargo makes the cars ride low on their springs. Gold bars catch the dim overhead light. Paintings in protective cloth wrapping line the walls. You can smell the leather of hastily packed suitcases and the metallic tang of precious metals. The train shudders as it picks up speed, carrying the accumulated wealth of a collapsing empire toward an uncertain destination in the Bavarian mountains. This was the reality described in declassified Allied intelligence reports from Operation Bernhard and the broader Nazi gold recovery efforts documented by the United States Army's Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Edsel, in his 2009 publication, The Monuments Men, details how multiple armored train convoys departed Berlin between April 15th and May 2nd, 1945, carrying an estimated 400 tons of gold reserves. 2,700 individual art pieces, and financial instruments worth approximately $3.7 billion in current valuation. The trains were tracked by Allied reconnaissance aircraft and radio intercepts processed by Major General Kenneth Strong's Intelligence Division at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Dr. Catherine Hickley, author of The Munich Art Hoard, published in 2014, documented the systematic evacuation protocol developed by SS Oberfuhrer Bruno Lohse and the Emergency Art Protection Command. The Convoy Manifest, preserved in the National Archives II facility in College Park, lists departure times ranging from 0300 to 0600 hours across 17 consecutive nights. Each train carried between 56 and 84 cars, with the heaviest documented at 1,400 tons total weight. The locomotives were Borsig Class 52 models specifically reinforced for the additional load. What makes these convoys impossible to reconcile with official records is the complete discrepancy between departure manifests and arrival documentation. When Allied forces intercepted the train routes at various points between May 4th and May 15th, 1945, they found empty cars. Every single intercepted train was empty. The cargo manifests remained perfectly intact, listing specific pieces by Reich inventory number, but the physical contents had vanished. Major William Horn of the 3rd Army's Counterintelligence Corps documented this phenomenon at 7 separate interception points across southern Germany. The mainstream explanation centers on coordinated offloading operations conducted at intermediate stations during the final weeks of the war. Military historians argue that the Nazi command structure, recognizing inevitable defeat, implemented pre-planned dispersal protocols to hide assets at multiple locations across the Alpine region. The trains served as mobile distribution centers rather than final transport, with cargo transferred to smaller vehicles and underground storage facilities between April 28th and May 2nd. But the logistics make this explanation impossible. The intercepted radio communications decoded by the government code and cipher school at Bletchley Park show no coordination messages between train commanders and potential offloading stations. Dr. Harold Welter's analysis in Das kommunikative Gedächtnis, published in 2010, demonstrates that the Wehrmacht's communications infrastructure had completely collapsed by April 20th, making coordinated multi-train operations impossible. More critically, the physical evidence contradicts offloading. The rail cars showed no signs of recent heavy cargo movement, no scuff marks on loading ramps, no residual packing material, no wear patterns on car floors that would indicate hundreds of gold bars and art pieces being moved. The British Rail Transport Security Service, working with American investigators, documented something even more puzzling. At 6 different locations where trains were intercepted, the cargo tie-downs and restraining equipment remained in perfect position, as if the contents had simply dematerialized rather than being physically removed. The wooden cargo frames, built specifically for transporting paintings, were undisturbed, their mounting hardware still arranged for non-existent artwork. Intelligence files remain classified at the highest levels. The cargo manifests are permanently sealed under national security provisions in both American and British archives. The train route documentation disappeared from Wehrmacht records, entirely not destroyed in bombing, not burned during the retreat, but systematically removed from all copies simultaneously across multiple command centers. How do 400 tons of gold and nearly 3,000 art pieces vanish from moving trains without leaving evidence of removal? Why do the cargo restraints remain perfectly positioned for contents that were never there when Allied forces arrived? What required the permanent sealing of manifests that supposedly document nothing more than wartime transportation? Where do the intercepted radio communications describing successful cargo security operations originate if the trains were already empty? And perhaps the most unsettling question: if these convoys represent the most thoroughly documented disappearance in military history, what does that suggest about the things that vanished without any documentation at all? The threads connecting these 10 buried secrets weave together into something far more disturbing than isolated wartime mysteries. The pattern emerges when you step back from the individual threads. A bell that defied physics. Archaeological expeditions hunting for mythical origins. Counterfeit currency that nearly collapsed economies. A general who vanished with humanity's most dangerous secrets. Underground cities that housed horrors we're still discovering. Stolen art that disappeared into shadow networks. medical atrocities disguised as research partnerships, Antarctic expeditions that left no official record, weapons documentation that was systematically destroyed, gold trains that carried more than treasure into the darkness of history. Each burial was deliberate. Each silence was purchased. The Third Reich didn't simply collapse in 1945. It performed the greatest disappearing act in modern history. Not the theatrical surrender in bunkers, but the methodical erasure of everything that mattered most. The projects that pushed beyond the boundaries of known science. The networks that reached into every corner of the civilized world. The collaborations that revealed how thin the line between enemy and ally really was. What vanished wasn't just Nazi Germany, it was the uncomfortable truth about how far human civilization had already traveled down paths we're still afraid to acknowledge. The most unsettling possibility isn't that these secrets were buried to protect the world from Nazi horrors. It's that they were buried to protect us from recognizing how much of that darkness had already become our own. How many of those scientists received new identities and continued their work? How many of those financial networks simply changed flags and kept operating? How many of those archaeological theories found their way into respectable academic institutions? The silence that followed 1945 wasn't the sound of evil being defeated. It was the sound of evil learning to speak a different language. And somewhere in the archives we're not allowed to see, in the bunkers we haven't found, in the Antarctica ice that refuses to melt, the question remains: what else are we still not being told about what we're capable of becoming?